Round of applause for Ben. So I'm going to do the plug here real quick since they started. This Build Right Maker series is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. Excuse me, the allergies are killing me today, so I got all this congestion. So, but these guys are coming to Dayton, Ohio, so we're trying to do something to bring people, like forward-thinking people in the industry into the Midwest. I'm tired of having to travel to the coast to see this stuff, right? So my friend Dan Mall and my buddy Kevin Hoffman are both coming this year yet. And then we've got a lineup of like 6 or 7 amazing speakers for next year. These are full-day workshops. They're really inexpensive. There's really limited space. It's basically like 40 or 50 seats that we can fit into this training center that we have. So, if you guys are interested in that stuff, hit buildright.io. The tickets are up for these 2 this year now, and we'll be announcing the next by the end of the year. We'll be announcing for next year. All right, let me get my presentation going here. And you need me to move?
No, do you mind hitting mute? Having some echo.
Oh, I thought it did. Yeah, it's muted.
Okay, that makes. Sorry about that.
All right, here we go. So, I thought it would be interesting to do a little bit of research on the ways that we're using navigation on smaller screens. I first got interested in this when I was sort of playing around with my first-gen iPhone on all these old sites, and all the mobile sites started to come out, right? Before responsive, before any of the fun stuff we get to do now. And I remember frequently in those days coming across a situation that I like to call the maze. And so I'll just share with you really quickly an example of the maze. And these are still in the wild today if you look around, okay? So, a little hard to see, but this is a small screen version of the Amazon.com site, all right? And I've just opened the page up and scrolled down a little bit on a phone, and I'm going to just show you a series of sort of screenshots of what I have to do to navigate to the book that I'm looking for, all right? So I'm looking for a book, so first of all I'm going to choose the books section, and that on page just kind of reveals the next set of, the next layer of children here. And then I'm going to choose books again, because that's what I'm still looking for. That's a page refresh, which takes me into this page. Now I'm going to keep drilling down a little bit further here. Arts and photography. And just a quick caveat, I was working on this deck. My daughter was sitting on my lap, and I was trying to get these images, and I did a screen cap here, and she saw the Frozen, I don't know if you can see this, but the Frozen soundtrack. She reached up with her grubby hand and smeared it all over my laptop screen, trying to touch my screen, right? That was off topic, but here we go. Architecture, going to keep drilling. Buildings, I'm interested in, and landmarks and monuments. And then, finally, right, if I'm able to sort of figure out this amazing hierarchy that you have so carefully crafted on your website, then I can get to the thing that I wanted, right, the content, right? And this is an experience that we've had for a long, long time. And what's interesting is, this is starting to change. And as this is starting to change with, Ethan's introduction of responsive and the way that all of us have embraced that and really just, dived into all different kinds of ways to present our nav, I think we've left some of our sort of our basic web design principles behind. And what's interesting is I think we tend to blame our users. And the truth is, if your user can't find your content, it's not because they're stupid, okay? Often they're just simply distracted. And, it's amazing what people will do, what they'll be doing while they're trying to browse and use your website. And so we need to think about those kinds of situations, right? So what I'd like to do to start with, I have sort of 2 sections to this presentation. The first, I want to go over this, which is just, as I've been sort of interested in this idea, I've been digging in and just looking at as many sites as I can. I've literally been through thousands of websites just cataloging the types of navigations that I'm seeing. And so I've laid out just sort of a rough, what I'm calling just a taxonomy, okay? And I want to go through that really quickly first so that we all have some of the same language to use to discuss the challenges. And then I want to just kind of step back from that and think about some things that we can take away from that learning, okay? And please feel free to interrupt if you have questions or other ideas, all right? We'll keep it casual. All right, so let's start off with this, these 2 groups of things I'd like to cover. The first is called a trigger indicator. And so you'll recognize this, I'm sure. But if you think about most websites today, is there a way we can turn this light out up here and get a little bit better? All right, we're going to work on that. There. Ooh. All right, that's okay. I'm okay with this if you guys are. Sure. Can they see on the video, or is that? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So this is the Media Temple site. It was redesigned maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago, something like that. And you can see it's a responsive site, right? You've got pretty much the same content on both of these screens. I've just taken my desktop browser and made it narrow on the right side so we can kind of quickly see the two. And you'll see that you've got Mr. Business here and Mr. Business, same picture, right? His little laptop is kind of off screen here. Same title as you've got on both sides, right? Title over the image here and subtitle. And then, if you look closely, the only thing that's really different about this site is the nav, right? And on the left side, you can see what most people think of as the navigation, right? This list of links across the top. And on the right side, on the smaller screen experience, we've got the hamburger icon. Thank you. Yes. And if I touch that hamburger icon, right, it reveals the exact same nav that's in both of these sites, right? Same markup, probably representing that nav. So this is the trigger, right? This little hamburger icon. And right now we talk about the hamburger because that's the one that most folks are seeing sort of most prevalently, right? But we're going to talk a lot about that over the next half an hour or so. So the idea behind a trigger is it's something that you have to do just to get the navigation on screen, okay? So before this, we didn't ever have to do that generally, right? Most of the time on a desktop site, the nav is there, and I can see it and I can interact with it. On small screens, we're choosing to hide pretty much the entire nav many times behind some sort of icon. So let's talk about what kinds of icons we're using. Actually, lots of different things, not just icons, words and icons. And I just want to show you a few examples, if that's all right. So like I said, I've been doing a bunch of digging around, just looking for examples of sites, looking for different ways that people are handling this. So the first section of words that are triggers, the most common that I'm seeing is the word menu, but there's lots and lots of others, right? And what's interesting is there seems to be words that sort of mean something like menu or navigation or something like that, and then there are usually sort of specialized words. As an example, you can see the Boston Globe here. They use the word sections because the word sections makes sense to someone who's reading a newspaper, right? Traditionally, we think of the sections of a paper. Lenovo uses the word products because if you're coming to Lenovo's site, you're probably interested in their products, right? So that sort of specialized use of a word can actually really help identify with your audience. It can also be a little bit risky, right? If you think about the case of, say, a restaurant, and you use the word menu, right? Menu means something different in the context of a restaurant than it does maybe if I'm just visiting a typical website. If I touch the word menu on a restaurant website, I think I'm going to see the menu that restaurant offers, not the menu of options for their site, right? So we need to be careful with those kinds of words. And then tons of icons, right? And I've got three sort of groups here. When this whole responsive movement started, there were a lot of organizations using the plus sign. That kind of has faded away. I was able to find a few that are still doing that. Hamburger, of course, you're seeing everywhere, right? You guys are familiar with this, I'm sure. I mentioned that Dan Mall's coming. If you go check out his personal site, he's got a nice little use of the hamburger icon. So sometime when you have a free minute, go check out his site. And then down arrow is another one that I see quite a bit these days still being used. And then, of course, we have all kinds of other things and combinations of words and icons, right? We've got gears that maybe sort of make you think of like settings or something like that. We've got transparent hamburgers. We've got the word menu on Microsoft's site with sort of like a bulleted list and different length hamburger slices. We've got the word navigation on the United Pixel Workers site. We've got menu and a button. We've got menu with a down arrow, menu with a plus sign. We've got all kinds of things, right? And this just goes on and on. I could show you an hour's worth of screens like this, okay? And so lots and lots of things that we're using just to indicate that there's a navigation here for you, user, to click on, okay? Now, let's talk about what happens once you touch or interact with that icon or word, all right? So I'll call these reveal patterns, and there's a handful of these I want to walk through quickly. So the first is this idea that it's just always available. In other words, the lack of a reveal animation is the first animation, the first pattern. If you can fit the nav on screen, many organizations just simply choose to do this, right? Here's a couple examples of sites that do it. On the left, you can see that almost half of the vertical real estate of this screen is taken up with navigation, right? So what that means for a user is that every page they go to here is kind of going to look the same. Probably not a great experience. But they're not going to have a hard time finding your navigation, right? Skinny Ties is one of my favorite sites, and I love how he's done a fantastic job of just conserving vertical real estate on this site, right? He's got the entire, he's got a little sale thing on top, he's got the brand, he's got the cart, search, and the entire nav all fit right beautifully up in the top of that site. So that's a good example. If you can fit them on screen, right, this is what a user is going to expect to see, a list of links. The next is called anchor to footer, and you've probably seen this a little bit as well, where the touching the trigger doesn't actually do anything like reveal, like any JavaScript action. It's simply just an old school HTML anchor right down to the footer where the nav actually lives. So here's an example. The Contents Magazine site does this. They use the word explore in the top right corner. The user interacts with that. It simply scrolls them to the bottom of the site, into the footer where the nav lives. Now, I chose this example because to make it sort of another point, which is that if you're going to do this, you probably want to make your footer look kind of like a navigation. And in this case, I don't really feel like they did a very good job of that. Do you? Right? They got this big ad-like thing, and I'm like looking at this heart, and then I see copyright stuff, and I'm like, oh, I just went to the bottom of the site. There's a search thing, and these little 4 links right here are the nav. So not a great experience, really, probably, right? So if you're going to do this, just make sure that your footer looks like a navigation to a user, right? Select element. Now, please hear me when I say that I am only giving you a list of things that I've found. I'm not making recommendations at this point, okay? This is one that I would probably say you shouldn't be doing, but this is still really popular. A lot of organizations are using sort of a list of links at larger resolutions, and then at smaller resolutions, they're wrapping those up into a native HTML select element. And so, you know, what's interesting about this is that it renders differently depending on the browser, depending on the operating system. So if I open this up in iOS 7 and I touch this select, I get, you know, this sort of blurred out, fadey, weird experience, right? This is what a lot of folks in iOS are used to seeing now. But if I open this up in a desktop browser and I'm just looking at Chrome and I've made my browser small here just to demonstrate a point, and I click on that, I get something much more familiar, right? So very, very different experience. And I've seen people do this and nest with dashes like way in, just like trying to indicate hierarchy and all kinds of crazy stuff inside their select box. If you think about this, right, this is not a list of links, right? A navigation should be something that I can click on and go to, and there's really no need to do something like this. If you do this, I would say make sure that you're providing a fallback, because if a lot of sites like this, if you disable JavaScript or if there's a JavaScript error, you just simply cannot navigate the site, period, right? A lot of problems with this. So another reveal pattern is called make room. So you can see here the user has interacted with the trigger, and the content is simply pushing down, sliding down the screen, right? Here on the College of Mount St. Joseph site, a little hard to see, but there's a main menu link right here. If you touch that on a small screen, Science Girl gets pushed down, and the nav is there for you to interact with. Okay. The opposite of that is sort of called cover-up, right? Where instead of pushing the content down, the nav actually goes over top of the content. The Driver Solutions website does this. There's a word menu with a down arrow here. The user interacts with that trigger. You can see the yellow circles are sort of hidden by the nav that's revealed. Make sense? Off-canvas is another big one. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, right? And you can see an example here where the users touch the hamburger icon in the top left corner. That hamburger icon and the content is all slid to the right, and the nav has kind of come in from off-canvas on the left. Disney does this pretty well. If you touch that top left corner to reveal, you're presented with the nav again on the left side. This has become really popular these days, and a lot of people are using off-canvas to hide really complex navigation schemes, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Priority Plus is one that I haven't seen a ton of, but it's one that I'm really excited about, and we're starting to do this a lot in our work. The idea with this is that you give the user something that looks kind of like a navigation, right? Instead of maybe a cryptic icon of some kind, you give them 2 or 3 links, and the last one of those links says something like, hey, there's more here, you know, more or nav or something like that. And when they interact with that last one, it reveals the rest of the nav. So the idea is that you prioritize a handful of these items out of the nav, and then you show them as many as you have real estate to show, and then when the user requests more, they can get them. Lycos does this. Yes, Lycos still exists. And if you go to, does anybody here ever use Lycos? We got some old school folks, right? Yeah, sometime in the past. Just wow. Damn, I'm getting old. Okay. So search, mail, and more are the 3 links that you see across the top, right? And that looks like a nav to most people. And if the user interacts with the word more there, they just get a nice little drop down. Super simple to build, right? And one of my friends in Pittsburgh at a shop called Bearded has been doing this as well, and they're doing something where they sort of detect how wide the screen is, and they just, as they have more real estate, they pop the top nav out and just show it, show it, show it. Really cool example. I think this is really important because I'll tell you a really quick story. I was meeting with a client, maybe it's probably been a year now, but this customer is a young lady who has her own sort of software as a service website, a really cool site. She is very tech savvy. She lives on this website all the time, right? I mean, this is what she does. She knows what she's doing with the web. And I was on a call with her once, and she said, we helped her with her site a little bit, and she was saying, we think it's time to make some changes to the tabs on our website. And I was like, quiet for a second on the other end of the phone. I'm like, okay, the tabs. I'm like thinking, where did we put tabs? I'm sure they're somewhere, but I don't remember, and I'm sure I'm supposed to know this. You know, so I'm like opening up the site really quick. I'm trying to find the tabs, and then she goes on to it, and I was just like, can you tell me, like, what is it that you're, you know, what are you thinking about changing? You know, so she starts explaining, and she's talking about her navigation, but she calls them tabs, right? And what's interesting about all of this stuff is, like, we use these words, we use these icons, and like, people don't call the navigation, okay? Like, if you talk to most users, like, we make assumptions about this because we deal with this stuff day in and day out, right? And you and I in the hallway or in the elevator are talking about the nav that we're going to build. Nobody else calls it that, okay? The tabs was what she called it because she was thinking about old school tab systems that we used to build, right? And so, like, this works really well because it just looks like tabs, right? We're not asking, there's no question about what's going on here. This is why one of the reasons that I really love this. And also another reason that you got to be careful about what words you use, right? On our site right now, it says navigation, and I've been thinking for a year, I need to change that word because most people don't use that, right? Just the geeks use that word. All right, enough stories. Full screen takeover is another one that I've started to see a lot lately. You can see basically when you touch the trigger of some kind, the entire experience just becomes navigation, right? T-Hand and Lax does this pretty well. If you touch the hamburger icon at the top right there, the entire screen becomes this really big, beautiful, bold navigation system. The Build Right site does this. The new Revlon site, I think, does this. A lot of organizations are moving towards this, you know. So lots of different reveal patterns, right? And then finally, once we've gone through all the stuff that we just did, right, now we finally have a navigation on screen that we can interact with, okay? And so we use these interaction indicators to indicate hierarchy and that there may be something below, something to the right, another interaction that you can, as a user, dig through. And we're using all kinds of different icons. These are going to be hard for you guys to see because a lot of them are small, but we've got arrows to the right, arrows down, X's, double arrows, we've got X's with magnifying glasses, pluses, minuses, dashes, I mean, like everything you can think of, right, to indicate this is us just trying desperately to help our users understand that there's more content, right, there's children of this parent, or you can click this thing to go deeper or something, right. So lots and lots of different ways that we do this. Okay. So, and then finally we have, after you've interacted in some way, we have a pattern of some kind for how the children and the hierarchy is represented. That's an interaction pattern. There's only 3 that I've found. I'm sure there are more. If you guys have ideas on these, please just hit me on Twitter, and I'm going to keep updating all this. But the first is very similar, just simply when I've chosen one of these, once the nav is opened and I've interacted, there's nothing, no depth, right? So the thing can just fit on screen, similar to the first one. So in this case, outerbanks.com, I've opened the nav by touching the word navigation here. The nav fits, but there's no more depth to the nav, so it's just a list of links. Same thing with our site. Navigation, the site, the nav is there for you to interact with. An accordion, of course, you're familiar with. As an example here, I've opened up the genre tab and the fiction tab, and now I'm about to touch on the horror. When I do, it reveals a series of books that are horror books, right? It's just continually revealing. The Canadian Walmart site does this. If I interact with that apparel in the top left, the children are revealed, right? Interestingly enough, on this site, every time I go here on my computer, I end up clicking the plus sign because for some reason I want to click the icon, but the plus sign doesn't work. You have to actually click the word. so if you're building these things, make sure you can make that hit area a little bigger, right? Simple to fix. And then paging, right? So instead of a vertical expanding or collapsing, paging is this idea that I move left to right. So in this case, I'm going to choose the word author, which becomes the title of the next screen, and then the authors are presented to me, okay? Here's an example. This is a site. If I choose the men's department here, I drill in, men moves up to the top, and then I see the children of the men's section in the store, right? So I can page through left to right and kind of keep moving through. So here's another example. You guys maybe have seen this. This is just sort of a prototype somebody built, but categories, I'm choosing devices. Devices becomes the main thing. I can choose mobile phones. Mobile phones becomes the primary, and I'm just presented with children. I just keep moving left to right, right? Very simple. So lots of different patterns for the interaction. So these 4 sections are the way that I've started to kind of take a look at sites and navigations now. And I think about it in this context so that I can compare them and have a language in our office. We can have a language to discuss this stuff, right? Okay, questions on any of that before we move into part 2? You guys are being awful quiet. Thought there was beer. Nothing, okay. All right, so what can we learn from all this? Well, one thing that I've been taking away from all this is something that you guys maybe have been doing forever, right? But this idea of content first. And why I think this is important, and I'll show you some of the tools we're using these days. When we start a site now, a lot of times we're starting with just text. You know, and Stephen Hay calls this designing with text. And literally he opens up a text editor and just starts typing, you know, the kinds of things that he wants to see on a page. We do this, which is on the left side there. That's called a content priority guide. It's kind of like a combination of a content model and a content prototype, sort of. And you kind of put stuff in. We use Google Docs because it's highly collaborative, right? I can get a client, you can give a client edit access to a Google Doc, and we can sit on the phone or on a Skype call or something and edit the thing together, right? They can make comments inside. So we do this a lot on all of our projects now because it helps our customers understand that this is why we're building the site, right? Because of the content that they have. And I use content in a really generic fashion here, right? I don't mean just words. I'm talking about words, pictures, video, even functionality that you want to make available to your users, right? This is a content prototype, which is literally static HTML with almost no style applied at all. It's intentionally ugly, and it's kind of like a wireframe, but it's linear because there's no layout, right? And we have our content strategists and our UX designers write the code for these, okay? You've heard it said, if you're going to be a designer on the web, you need to learn CSS, right? Anybody agree with that? Nobody agrees with that. Okay, there we are. Well, I think the same is true. If you're going to be a content person or a UX person, you should probably learn some HTML, right? So, and who better to write sort of the purest form of our HTML than the content? The people who understand the content, right? HTML is hypertext markup language. We're adding semantic meaning to the content of our pages, right? That's the idea. So we start with this kind of thing. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that we're not eventually going to also evolve this markup, right? Like, we have to add things to it in order to create the kinds of experiences that we want. But I want to start pure, you know? I want to start with this basic model. So this is basically live content. It's got like links in it. You know, if you want to see one of these, you can go to our site. This is the one that we built for when we were redesigning our site. We did it sort of in public, and in the footer there's a link that takes you out to all the things that we did during the whole process of building our site. But the whole point with all this is really to make sure that you're building the right navigation, right? And this is so important because there are so many sites out there and so many clients, right, that will come to you and say, hey, we just want our site to be responsive. You don't have to do much with the content. Just take what we've got and make it fit on a small screen, right? Anybody ever had that happen? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Those are my people. This happens to us all the time, right? And we have to position ourselves in a way, we have to position ourselves with some authority, right? Like, we're experts. This is what we do every day, day in and day out. We need to understand that a small screen means I need to think about things. Like, I have to prioritize, right? And Luke Rubluski wrote about this whole idea of mobile-first web design, right? He wasn't talking about the order of your styles, okay? He was talking about using a small screen to get your customer to really think about what's important to them. And if you start with that, right, if you start with the content and make them choose, make them put things in order, that's why all those deliverables are linear, right? Pick the most important thing, put it first. Then you can start to draw out what's really important for them. So this is key, right? I'm tired of building and seeing people build sites that have just thousands of links in the nav tucked away in an off-canvas somewhere because that cleans up the look of the homepage, right? That's not a good experience for our users. So let's talk about complex architecture, another thing that we can consider. And this has actually happened for a while, but I think it feels like it's made more prevalent with the use of these off-canvas and just interesting nav techniques that we're using these days. As an example, we'll take a look at the Marriott site. So Marriott was recently redesigned. It's responsive now. It's actually a really nice site. You can see here I've got the nav on the left screen, and I've touched or interacted with the Marriott Rewards section, which is revealing the children of that section, okay? Now, what's interesting about this is because touching or clicking this is a trigger to reveal the children, I can't go to the Marriott Rewards page by touching or clicking it, right? So now one of the children is actually the parent itself, right? This is a little bit meta, but in order to get to the Marriott Rewards page, I have to touch or click it, open it, and then touch the first child, right? Who's ever done this on an app, right? We've all done it. I've done it. Okay, so it's a challenge that's presented because now we're dealing with touch devices. We don't have hover, right? Like we used to, where I could hover over something, and then that could be a different action, or I could click it to go to the parent. Instead, we're doing this kind of thing. So that's a nice solution, right? But there's lots of other things that are happening. People are trying to solve this in different ways. So here's another example. I've got two sites. Side by side, open up small screen. This site, now the nav on both of these is opened. Okay, Lenovo on the right has an off canvas to the left. So this is the nav that's been revealed in from the left. I've touched this laptops and ultrabooks section right here, which revealed the children of that section. Okay, on the driver solutions side on the left, I've touched this little section over here, this little arrow, which revealed the children. Okay, so what's happening is the top level is split into two different touch areas now, right? One which opens and reveals the children, and one, the other side here, which takes me off to the parent page, okay? So in order to solve this problem, we're creating more complexity, right? Now, to think that our users are really going to actually understand that the arrow to the right means that's going to go off to another page, and the arrow down means it's going to open, I don't know, right? Like, do you think that's really going to work? Maybe. What actually happens when you test this stuff, and I've done some tests, is they touch the bigger thing, right? so you could use this, right? Like, you could use this to be the sort of, if you decide that you want people to drill down to the children, you might do something like this, right? Because more people are going to touch the big thing, they're going to get to the children, they're going to drill down further. If you decide you want them to click and refresh and drive through the site one page at a time, you might choose to do something like this, right? So we just need to think about this stuff, and we have to test it, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. Let's talk about priority. Every time I speak, I feel like I tell this story about microwaves. Has anybody heard this microwave story? I love microwaves. I don't know. There's something beautiful about them. So I'm going to tell it one more time. I actually grew up with this microwave. This is the Amana radar range. Anybody ever use one of these? A couple of us. My parents live in Vandalia, Ohio, over by the Dayton International Airport, and they still have this microwave in their kitchen today. I used it last week, literally. This thing is amazing, right? First microwave that was sort of mainstream in people's homes. Okay, the thing is huge. It's literally like that big, right? It's got this beautiful chromed front. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. The interface on this is fantastic. 2 big dials, 2 buttons. The top dial, if you turn it all the way around, gets you 60 seconds. Okay, the bottom dial, you turn it all the way around, 60 minutes. All right, she's pulling a fully cooked pot roast out of that thing. You see this? All right. And then there's 2 buttons, a green one and a red one. Anybody got an idea on what those might be? Right? About as easy as it gets, right? For my whole childhood, this is the microwave that I used, right? I just open the door, put the stuff in there, close it, turn the dial, push the button. That was it. Super simple, right? And I can remember going off to college and coming across this, and like, you know, I'm down in the dorm room, I'm trying to figure out how to warm up some, I don't know, pasta or something, probably. And that looks like a telephone to me. I have no idea what that is, right? And this is getting worse, okay? This is, you guys are all looking at this thing, and that's easy. I know how to use that. But check this out. This is actually a remote control for a microwave. That exists, okay? I'm serious. I guess you could have somebody else put the food in, and you could sit on the couch, and then you could just, right? I don't know. And if you think that's crazy, check this out. That's a microwave. That is an app for your phone to control the microwave, right? Amazing, you know? Like, how complex do we need to make this stuff, you know? So finally, after many years of struggling and being, I guess you would call it microwave challenged, I don't know, I have discovered a button on the microwave that is just fantastic, okay? It's called Minute Plus. Yes. Anybody else love the Minute Plus button? Yes, thank you. Minute Plus, man, this is it. You go up to the microwave, you put your stuff in, you close the door, you push Minute Plus, and it cooks it for a minute. That's it, you know? Want to do 2 minutes? Push it. Yeah, see, somebody just told me this. You can actually push it 2 times in a row, and it goes 2 minutes. It's amazing. Instead, we give people this stuff, right? Breakfast bar, lunch on the run, 1-dish dinners. What does that? That's a button on a microwave? Like, what does that even mean? I don't know. So I was doing a little more research on microwaves, and I found this microwave. This is a microwave for the blind, okay, made by Panasonic. I want to find this thing and buy this for my house. This thing is amazing. It's got 10 buttons, okay? Each one has a time associated with it. The first button will warm something up for 10 seconds. Second button, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 45, 60, minute 30, 2 minutes, 2:30. This is amazing, right? One button to do anything you want. It's perfect. This is like 98% of microwave use, right? Right? I mean, this is the perfect microwave. And if you want to do more complicated stuff, there's a few buttons down here you can do. You can see there's actually braille on these buttons, right? I mean, this, in my mind, and I love the analogy of this, because building something that's accessible here makes it much more functional for everybody, right? And this is true for what we do. And this is about prioritization, right? This is why I love that Priority Plus navigation system, because you're figuring out what's really important to your users, and you're pulling those things out and you're giving it to them. This is Priority Plus for a microwave, right? Now, let me show you how Priority Plus might work in another way on a website, okay? So here's an example. This is an old website, the old Mobilism site. It was a responsive site maybe a year or two ago that was, you know, for an event in Amsterdam. But you can see the nav on the top left side, right? If the browser gets down a little smaller, this is what happens. Now you look at that and you think, well, what happened to the nav, right? Like the whole nav is gone. There's only 2 links now. One says program, one says tickets. And then there's this tiny little menu thing. If you touch that menu word, it scrolls you to the footer where the nav actually lives. So you can get to all that nav that you wanted, right? But they've said, hey, you know what? We're an event. Mobilism is an event. What are the 2 most important things that a user would want about an event? I want to see who's speaking, and I want to buy a ticket, right? So they've just really 80% of the use case. Here's 2 links, and I mean it's not that fancy, right? If you open up the thing and look at the source, there's an unordered list that's just display none at large resolutions, and it's visible at small. I mean, 2 links, right? Super simple to do this. I mean, this is 10 minutes of work, literally. Okay, and I think this is brilliant. You know, I think we need to look for this kind of thing more often. We need to look for opportunities to do this. Okay, that's priority. Let's talk a little bit about focus. I've noticed this recently, and this is really dark, so it's hard to see, but I'll explain for you. So I've got 2 sites opened up that both use an off-canvas left nav. They're almost identical in the way that they work. Mashable's on the left, and this is Disney on the right. And if you look right here, there's actually sort of grayed out content. It's like an overlay, like a modal overlay kind of thing there. It's like 50% black, right? So it's hard to see because it's a little dark with the projector, but you can see the actual content through this. What Disney's done here is they've actually chosen to sort of dim out the content, right? So when you open the nav, you get this sort of dimmed out content, and the navigation itself really kind of pops out at you. Like that's the thing you requested. They're showing it to you, and they're kind of pushing the rest of the stuff back. Mashable doesn't actually do that. And what's interesting, when I open the Mashable navigation, as a user, like just sort of without thinking much about it, I have a lot of hesitation about how to close it, right? Because I think if I don't see anything that interests me in the nav, I got to get back to that page. I don't want to refresh. I don't want to wait for the page to reload. So I'm thinking about touching somewhere over there, but I don't want to go to the article giving me a thumbs up. I just want to close the nav, right? With Disney, it's really intuitive. It's like it's dark, and I don't have any hesitation about just touching over there, and it closes. Both these sites, there's an overlay, right? Like if I touch over here, it's not going to take me to that article. It's actually going to close the nav like I would expect it to. But they didn't do anything to help me focus in on the thing that was important, right? Not hard. I mean, they could have done that in like 10 seconds, one little line of CSS to do that, right? So like we need to think about those simple little things that help our users focus on the thing they're requesting and give them confidence to get out if they need to get out, right? Okay, let's talk about behavior. This is a little bit tricky. So we were talking about these accordions, right? And I want to show you a couple different ways that these accordions work. On the Lenovo site, I've opened up an off-campus nav here, and I've touched on the education section, which revealed the children here, and I touched on the solutions section, which revealed the children here. You can see both of those sections are open at the same time, okay? Here and here. The parent is this and this. Not a big deal, right? But this is multi-open. If you don't do anything else to an accordion, right, you just put a little JavaScript in so that when you touch it reveals, when you touch it again it closes. If you just do that, then you can open all the parents up, right, on an accordion. You can get a really long nav if you want, but the user gets to choose what's open, right? There's sort of been this new thing that's happening, right, called a single open, where, and Microsoft does this now. If I open up the shop, which is a parent item on a Microsoft site, and then I touch on one of these others, like here if I touch on products, it actually closes shop and then opens products for me, right? And this is a single open accordion, okay? Now, if you do this, it's pretty cool, right? It feels neat because they're closing and opening at the same time. You get this kind of cool motion happening. But with Microsoft, if you do what I did the very first time I used the site, which was open one, and then scroll to look through the nav, right? And then touch the next one, and it's not quite as long as the first one. This is what I got. Completely lost my context. There's no nav on screen at all. So what happened is I opened up the nav, right? Then I scrolled, then I opened up this nav, and this one closed, and it was only a short one that opened. So my screen is down here, right? I just completely lost all context for what I was doing. And there's no reason that this should happen, right? It's because we're trying to get all fancy with JavaScript to close and only let them open certain things at certain times, right? So in order to fix this problem, right, then we do something called auto scroll with a little bit more JavaScript, right, where now I've got the Save Money section open. But if I choose to open the Environment section, it closes Save Money, opens Environment, and scrolls Environment to the top, right? Totally jarring experience, you know? So it's like we're adding in more JavaScript to fix a problem, right? Because then we're adding in some JavaScript because we were afraid of how much nav we had. We didn't want to open too many sections at a time. All this stuff feels like such a waste of effort to me, right? We're just creating complexity. And if you guys want to see this functioning later, I'll show you how sort of terrible some of these experiences are. Microsoft's site used to not be like this. It used to be that I could touch and open as many of these things as I wanted, right? And it was a lot of nav. And I'm starting to feel like maybe it's them being sort of ashamed of how much nav they had, right? That they decided we'll just close them so you can't open them all up at once. Okay, so let's keep talking a little bit about JavaScript. As we're building more of these responsive navs, one thing that we're striving for is this idea of a single DOM. So as an example, on the Lenovo site, right, we've got all this nav, right? If I just open up the laptops and Ultrabooks, this is a lot of navigation. I've got ads in my nav, right? If you look at this left side, this is a responsive site on the smallest viewport width. It's the exact same HTML that's representing both of these. There's not two navs in the DOM. It's the same nav, right? And it looks very, very different, but it's the exact same nav. And we're just using CSS and we're using some JavaScript to be able to sort of transition interaction models and transition in terms of the visual layout, right? Not hard to do this. It just takes a little bit of work. In order to do that kind of thing, you need to do something like this, right? And this is just a quick tool. One of the guys in our office wrote this thing called Media Check, which is like a wrapper for match media stuff, and it lets you basically bind and unbind JavaScript events as you cross over the breakpoints in your system. So in using a tool like this, you can have a nav that's got hovers and clicks on large screens, and you can completely transition to touch and all kinds of different things, you know, at different screen sizes. So there's lots of alternatives to that as well. We're still the kind of company that also believes that fallbacks are still worth it. All right, so we take a lot of care to try and make sure that our sites are going to work without JavaScript, right? And we can talk more over a beer later if you'd like about that. I don't want to get into the arguments about that now, but as an example of this, off-campus without JavaScript, one of my friends over at Pentu wrote this article. It's really an interesting solution using a checkbox, right? And the checked attribute in CSS to be able to handle bringing a nav in from off-screen with just using CSS instead of having to use JavaScript to depend on that. So really kind of a cool little solution. There's lots of these kinds of things we can be doing. And then let's talk a little bit about usability as well. The one thing is, so I didn't really share this, but we've been doing a lot of usability testing on some of these bigger navs on small screens. And the one thing that I've learned the most in all of the testing that we've done is this: most users do not expect to have to trigger your nav. Okay, and what that means is that most users are not using your nav because your nav is hidden on small screens behind some icon or some word, right? So what that's made me start to do in our shop, what we've been doing is we've been trying to do testing now without the nav. Like, can the user navigate your site if they never find the nav? That's the question that we're asking. And what that means, it takes us back to this first idea that the content first, right? We need to think about our content. We need to construct paths through our websites. And we need to provide them with the context that they need to be able to make good decisions about where they're going, right? So this is a really important question for us these days, and it's really easy to try, right? I open up websites all the time now. At lunch, I open up the inspector, and I go find their nav container. In this inspector, I'll do display none, and I'll just get the inspector off screen, and I just try to use their site for a little bit, you know, and see what it's like. And we do that with our sites, and we'll put users in front of them with no nav. Just take it out and see how they do, right? And you're going to quickly find that there are many things that they want to get to and cannot do. And it's not that hard to make it work, right? We've stopped, I feel this is so strange, but I feel like we've stopped putting links in our text, you know? Like HTML is just, a link is a beautiful thing, and we talk about our services all the time in the body of our site, and we don't even link to the pages that have the deep descriptions of this. It's so easy to do. So please, put links in your text. Simple to do. Okay, another thing I think that we could do is teach use. And you know, so it's probably not fair for me to say that all of your websites need to be completely usable with no nav, right? That's maybe a little unfair. So what I think we can do is start to do things that help our users learn how to use the navs that we're giving them, right? And I noticed this. I've been watching Microsoft's site closely since it went responsive. And anytime they make a change, I notice right away, and then I'm like, I find myself in this sort of weird place or like trying to like second guess why they made the change they made. But I noticed maybe a few months back that the nav on their site, when I loaded the homepage, it opened the nav. And usually when I used to go to the site, these 4 things were hidden, and you had to touch this little menu to get this thing to open. Well, all of a sudden they just started showing you the nav when you got on the homepage. And I started to think about it, and I was like, oh, maybe, I have no idea if this is true or not, but I thought maybe they're trying to teach their users, right, that there is a nav here. You know, it's up at the top, and here's the things that you can get to. And then if the user drills in and goes to another page, it's going to be closed, but they'll think, oh, the nav was at the top. I can scroll up, and it's not there, but there's the word menu, right? Then maybe they're trying to teach them, right? So I like that idea. It's kind of a cool idea. And then here, this Priority Plus. The reason I love this is because it's a teaching pattern, right? The user is very used to seeing link, 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 right? So now we give them that. We give them what they're used to seeing, and that represents navigation to them. And then we just use the word more or something like that to help them understand that there's more here, you know? I love this pattern. I think we're going to start to see a lot more of it. This can be overdone, right? I don't know if you guys saw the Time Inc. site, but there was a time there where they, unattended, there was a season where the Time site had just a hamburger icon in the top left corner, and they chose to do that at all resolutions, right? So now I'm opening the site up on my desktop on my big cinema display at work, top left corner, hamburger icon. And I'm guessing what happened is nobody was using the nav, right? So they crammed the word menu underneath it. Nobody was using the nav still. And so they put this full screen takeover that comes up, and it's just like, hey, if you'd like, welcome to Time Inc.'s new navigation. Would you like to, a little like explanation of how to use it, right? Like there's a point where this gets to be too much, okay? So like don't interrupt your user to say, hey, we just want you to understand there's lots and lots of important information here behind this navigation. Don't do that kind of thing, right? You got to be intelligent with how you do this. And then finally, kind of this idea that familiarity breeds usability. And I think the Walmart's Canada site does this well. And this is a new trend in a lot of big e-com sites, right? They have this sort of shop all departments thing that kind of comes down. This is on small screens. It comes down and covers up content, but you can see the exact same nav lives in both of these contexts, right? So our users are going to understand this. They may learn this on a desktop system and then become familiar with it and then understand its use on smaller screens or vice versa, right? So we look for this, we call this cross-width consistency, right? Looking for opportunities to be consistent in the way that we present things throughout an experience regardless of the device, okay? And then, if you'll bear with me really quickly, this is sort of my thing. I feel like I need to talk a little bit quickly about this just to wrap us up tonight. There's this idea of collaboration, right? And you can kind of think of this as a spectrum, right? You have this far end where you don't collaborate, right? And this is where you think that you're awesome, right? And on the other end is when others know you're awesome, when you get to work with other people and they can recognize your brilliance, right? These things are actually kind of far apart. And the thing that separates them is collaboration. And I like to talk about this because I think it's so important to the work that we do. And this is important for you on your teams, right? It's important for you with your clients and all that stuff. But in this context, I want to tell you one other story, and then I'll kind of wrap us up. I had a chance to go out to Muir Woods in San Francisco. Has anybody ever been to? Yes? Okay. It's an amazing place, okay? Coastal redwoods, and it's right out on the coast, these amazing trees. These things are so huge. They are literally taller than the Statue of Liberty, okay? These trees are just, and they're like, I mean, you can't even get them close to putting your arms around them, just massive trees. And they're fascinating. I was there with one of my partners at Sparkbox, and we were meeting with a client. We had kind of a weekend layover in San Fran and then another meeting, so we decided to go out and visit this place. And we're walking through this thing, and it's like, it's just so quiet, and it's a bright sunny day, but there's no sunlight that gets through because these branches just block it all out. And I'm walking through, and we came across this park ranger, and we were asking him some questions, and he looked at us, and he said, so how deep do you think the roots are on these trees? You know, like, think about the size of these things. And I said something like, they're probably like, like half the height of the tree, right? He said, no, they're 10 feet deep. And I was like, wait a second, seriously? Come on. I'm like, 10 feet is like, tiny. There's no way that could work, right? And he's like, no, they're 10 feet deep, but they go 100 feet out. And all these trees are interlocking roots underneath the ground, right? And I'm thinking about like the analogies from my team, you know, and like this is brilliant. And then he starts to tell us like how these trees, when the people first settled this land, they cut a lot of these trees down and they would leave one standing. And these big branches would provide some shade. And a year later, that tree would just fall over because there's no support system for it, right? And he was telling us how they reproduce. This looks like this tree has some big old fungus or something on it. I thought it was like a mess. He's like, no, that's a really healthy redwood. That's called a burl, and that's full of seeds. And what happens is because redwoods block out all of the light, right? They capture all the water. They can't reproduce like a normal tree would. So most trees, you know, an acorn or something or whatever will fall. It can get sun, it can get light, and it can sort of grow and be its own tree, right? Well, if one of these seeds falls, it's going to die because there's no sunlight that gets through. These things block it all, right? It's nice and cool down there. So instead, they grow these huge burls. These things are full of seeds, tiny, tiny seeds. And when this tree is ready to reproduce, that thing just bursts open. And these seeds just fall right down on its roots. And because they're so shallow, the seed just goes a little bit down, and it actually attaches to the mother tree. And it gets sustenance from that tree. It'll grow 15 feet in 1 year straight up, about that big around. I mean, amazing. These things are amazing. And they grow in these little family groups because they need each other, right? They need each other to do something timeless. These trees have been around for 800 years, okay? I mean, they've lived through generations of people like us, right? And it's kind of like a spiritual thing when you go to this place. I mean, when you walk through it, you feel like there's so much here that's happened, right? And so what I came away from this trip with just a lot of things that I've been thinking a lot about, but one of them is that I can't do timeless work on my own, right? And the same is true for you, right? You can't do timeless work on your own. And when I translate that into how I'm thinking about the work I've been doing lately, I would say it kind of like this. Design without testing is guesswork. And I feel like we've been doing a lot of guesswork with our navigations, right? And so I think it's time for us to start to think about this, right? Design is what you and your client do together, right? Testing is what you and your users do together. So you can restate this like this. You and your client working without your users is guesswork, right? So what we need to do, I think, is start to invite them into this, right? We're doing stuff now in our office where we're trying to have like a regular, like once a week, we've got users coming in so that we can, whatever we're working on, we can put it in front of people, right? And we just give them some we just give them something, right? Some gift cards or something, $50, you know? It's really worth it, okay? And the idea is that you need to collaborate, not just with your client, but also with real users, okay? I can't state this enough. And I want to thank you guys so much for your time. It's been enjoyable. So I'm not sure. Yeah, that's good. Is it hot in here? Holy smokes!
No, you're just moving around.
All right. So do we want to? Do you want to do questions, or do you just want to get some pizza and beer? Because I'm cool with either. Okay. If there are any, I'm happy. Yeah.
I forget how you refer to it, but the menu where as you get smaller, they'll show a few options.
Priority plus. Yeah.
Priority plus. And what are some examples?
I can find a few more for you, but lycos.com is the one that comes to mind right now. I know
They
there's
must
a
have
bunch.
already changed. So
Oh, is it not? Really? Wow.
Okay.
I'll tweet a few to you. Yeah, I got a few. What's up, man?
Kind of off topic, but I wondered what kind of data you were doing on the full summary stuff you guys do.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So we'll get another question. I'll pull that up real quick. Did you have something? Yeah.
I did. You're talking about collaboration, and earlier you mentioned a gentleman in Madison. Could you talk a little bit about accessibility and how that all factors into everything you're describing, and why do you use the person in Madison?
Okay, what was your name?
Oh, it's Steve Jacobs.
Steve was asking me earlier, or he was telling me earlier that he does a lot of accessibility work, and I was mentioning that I was at a conference in Madison maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I met this guy named Kevin, and Kevin is completely blind, and he was there and he did a presentation at this conference. It was fantastic, And he literally he sits down on stage, they turn the lights out, they ask everybody to turn their phones off, and close their laptops. And he gets his iPad plugged in. You were there, right? You remember. It was like, I got chills, right? He starts playing chess. He's completely blind, starts playing chess on his iPad, and the audio is coming through, right? And it's just like, I have no idea what's going on, right? I mean, it's an amazing experience. And he's up there just like totally playing a game of chess, and it was really cool. At the end, you know, they show the screen, and he's like halfway into a game of chess, and it's totally happening, right? So I was fascinated. So I went up and I met this guy, and we ended up hanging out all day. He held onto my arm, and we walked around the city, and we had lunch. And at the end of the day, I was like, "What do you do? Like, what's your?" He doesn't have a job. He was really talented, really smart guy. It's hard to get a job, obviously. So I called him up a week or two later, or just hit him on Twitter or something, and I said, "Hey, I've got this project. We need help with accessibility in our office. Everybody needs help." Okay. And his talk was about how it's very different to be accessible, like to check off the boxes, right? That's one thing, but it's a completely different thing to be usable and accessible, right? So he's coming at it from a blind user's perspective, and he's like, he said to me, I don't use the web because nobody is usable on the web. He just uses apps, like that's his thing, you know. So, so I would say, you know, like for us, what we've been doing is we do a lot of work statically in templates first, and we push them up to a QA box, and we give him access, and he goes out there 2 or 3 times a week, and he tries to use the stuff that we're doing, and he records these little audio. He'll say, like, Ben, man, you totally messed this up. Like, this link doesn't have a heading in front of it, so I can't really move through to these from heading to heading, you know? It's like, if you just make the heading of each of these sections an actual heading, that would help me a ton. You know, so I get these little audio files from it. It's awesome. So, and then our devs will call him up, and we'll like kind of walk through this stuff, and he just helps us. You know, he just helps us not just check the boxes for accessibility, but build something that's actually usable, right? And the benefits are like, it's like that microwave. You know, it's like you're building something that's much easier to use. I mean, it really is better for everybody. So that's kind of our perspective. Doing responsive doesn't get you accessibility. You know, that was kind of when I heard your question earlier. It doesn't, you know, any more than building a website does, you know. But, you know, if you take a little bit of time, it doesn't take that much to just try it, you know. And so I don't know. Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. You were asking about the full article quick read. So on our site, one thing we've been thinking a lot about is the idea that we shouldn't make assumptions about what our users want, right? So, like images is a good example. Or a video. If I go to YouTube, or if you have a YouTube video embedded in your site, I can usually choose to either get the standard def or the high def video, right? You know, the little SD, HD button, right? You guys know this. So if you're like at home on your Wi-Fi and you want to see the big explosions, right? You choose HD and you go full screen. If you're on your phone on like 3G or something, right? You're not going to do that. But the user has a choice, right? And so what we're trying to do is find other places where a user might want to make a choice. So this is totally just a goofy experiment, but the idea is that you may want to read a full article on our blog, or you may just want to kind of see the summary, right? And then you can drill into sections that are interesting to you, right? It's just a total goofy experiment, but it's been interesting. You know, we're seeing like it's almost an even split on what people prefer. Now, it's not really fair to say that actually, because we remember, right? We write a cookie, so you choose. So half the people are choosing one and half are choosing the other, but it's like it just remembers. And so I don't know. It's not an easy thing to get real data on, and it's really just kind of more of an experiment. But good question. We can talk more about it too. What's up, man? Yeah. He's working right now on a site that has a pretty complex nav. We haven't had him. It's only been a few months that we've been working with him, so I don't have a lot to share with you on that right now. But it's definitely something that we're digging. I mean, this is an area where I'm sure that we have real problems, right? I mean, we're doing all kinds of stuff to make these things work. So I'm really interested. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question though.
It's actually a lot of fun.
It is fun. It's interesting. It really is. Yeah. What's up, man?
document or investigate what type of navigation, off canvas, what type of navigation, meaning global or contextual. So if you went, just on the home page, you're assuming global, but what if you click one level down, you click that menu again? Did you always see global again, or did you see contextual relative to the section that you're now in?
So I'm not sure I understand what your question is. I understand what you're suggesting.
So I was wondering if you started to see patterns.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Are we doing global under that
Yeah.
view, or are they taking
Most of the examples that I'm seeing, it's sort of a single nav that contains everything. That's what most people are doing these days. There were some universities in particular that I noticed that are doing sort of a sub-nav that is very separate from the global nav, right? A contextual nav of some kind. I probably need to do some more work to categorize those in some way, but they're usually using the same kinds of patterns, but just there's two of them on a page. So, and I'm guessing that's why we end up combining them, because it gets really confusing all of a sudden if there's two things to choose from on a small screen, and they're both doing the same kind of accordion-y or off-canvas things, right? So, is it hot in here?
Yeah, let's get in there.
What's up, man?
So I'm just kind of curious. I struggle with this personally. I think that I work on. You know, we talk about all this stuff too, right? We look at all these different navigation options and systems possible.
Right.
And I'm just curious what your personal opinion is. And I think there's two parts to it. There's slightly different questions, but it's related. How important is it for us as, you know, we can probably realistically safely say it's there for part of the community, right? Doing this type of thing. How important is it, and sort of the second part is how accountable we feel towards arriving at a consistent sort of one of these different targets? Or is it okay that we've come up with all these options and they all sort of
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like it's natural, right? Like for us to experiment and to try and, you know, and I think we've gone through this phase of like, man, let's just try everything, right? I mean, you saw those icons. I literally could have shown you hundreds more, okay? and I think that's natural, right? We don't know, so it's like shotgun, you know. It's just like, let's try everything and let's see what works. The problem is we're not actually seeing what works. Like, we're not testing it. We're not capturing the data, right? So what I'm seeing is that most people, like half of our users, just never find the nav if it's hidden behind something, right? That's a huge stat. I mean, that's a big deal, right? And I was listening to Lou Grabowski was talking at a conference I was at not too long ago, and he was talking about how the hamburger icon came into favor because Facebook did it in a mobile thing, and then they tested it and it performed terribly, so they took it out. But none of us read that article, right? So, yeah.
So I mean, to that point, I sort of feel like this is different.
Okay.
So I work in large enterprise.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a pretty mature user experience team for large
Good.
labs.
Yeah.
We do a lot of that.
Okay. Okay.
Because we're starting.
Yeah.
And feel free to but I mean, you know, I think so far in some testing, we're starting to see sort of where you're going. It's that there's almost a huge.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Participants under a certain age recognize that.
Yep.
No problem.
Of course, there's demographics.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And people who aren't used to seeing it, who aren't used to
Yeah.
you still recognize it.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my question. It's like, well, I almost feel like if we don't say, let's go that direction,
Yeah.
then we'll never get there. I'm sure there was a point where the magnifying glass
Yeah.
really searched.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Like, well, we struggle with trying to find a universal icon log out once we're in the
Yeah. Right. Right.
So, like, it's got to be sort of, like you said, we're in this learning curve.
We are, yeah.
But if we don't try it seems like it's going to take a much longer process.
Sure. And I think you're right. Like, eventually, right, if we just all decide, like, we could all have a little oath here if you guys want to raise your right hands, you know, we'll just all use the hamburger icon from this point forward, right? We could do that kind of thing, you know. And there have been some posts written about how that's sort of the emerging thing, right? All that's happening. And you're right. Over time, all that's, eventually people will get it, right? I guess what I'm trying to do is like I'm trying to figure out like what's the takeaway that I can take action on now, right? Because we're still using the hamburger icon, you know, and so I think Priority Plus, like I think that's a valid option, right? It's a really valid option. I think simplifying your content, I think that's a really valid option, right? These are not things that are going to hurt us, and I think it's going to make the web better. Period. So I'm looking for things that we can do, and like the content first approach, making sure you're building the right now, those kinds of things. I think those are important too. So I'm trying to use this maybe as a platform to encourage people to do this stuff right too. Does that make sense? All right. What's up?
Well, kind of tying in that same line. So what's your thoughts then on like some of the larger frameworks that obviously mobile or responsive based?
Yeah. Foundation, all that stuff. Sure. So you guys might throw your beers at me, but I'm not a big fan of those kinds of tools. I think they have.
But along the lines of that standardization, I mean, I know there's a lot of overhead that comes with some of it, but
yeah,
it does move us towards at least there's a decent amount of adaptation of those, or adoption of those. Then then that standardization kind of then once it becomes a paradigm that everybody recognizes. Yeah, and if you want to break it, okay, but at least we're.
Yeah, I mean that. I guess you could think of it that way. Yeah, these things aren't that difficult to build, right? And so Dave Rupert wrote an article where he talked about the idea that we should be building tiny bootstraps, our own custom tiny bootstraps for our customers. That should be what we give them, not just a set of pages, like a system that works for them. And so in that way, I think you could help an organization become much more consistent in their use of those things. Yeah. All right, I'm going to stick around. We'll have beers if there's beer left, and cold pizza if there's pizza left. But it's hot, and I'm sure some of you got to get moving. So.
I feel like one thing turned off the lights from the AC turned off.
Oh, that did it, huh?
So I think
yeah. Thank you guys so much. Very, very good to meet you.
You mentioned
More pizza and there's more drinks everywhere else. Thanks for coming.